Hello, and welcome back to Podfinder. My name is Philip, and I'm here to talk about Pathfinder 2nd Edition. This is part of a series I am producing covering the various deities in the Pathfinder role-playing game and its setting, the world of Golarion. Last time, I covered Nivi Rhombadazzle, the Grey Polychrome, goddess of gambling and gemstones, and the first of the Deep Gnomes. This week, I am kicking off another themed month here at Podfinder. July might have been Elf Month, but the time of the Dwarves has come. So, today, I'm kicking off Dwarf Month. The Dwarves are, by far, my favorite core ancestry in Pathfinder 2e, and their ancestral pantheon is such a cool piece of set dressing. I first discussed Dwarven religion last year with my video on Torag, the Forge Father, the head of the Dwarven pantheon. Today, I'll be continuing my discussion with Torag's elder brother, Magrim, the Dwarven god of death. Before that, though, if you enjoy this video and want to hear more Pathfinder lore, consider subscribing or commenting below. With that out of the way, let's move on to the rundown. Magrim, dubbed the Taskmaster, is the oldest of the Dwarven gods. He is most commonly revered as the Dwarven god of death, though, much like Pharasma, he is rarely seen with fear or unease by his worshippers. More than just a deity of death, Magrim sees himself as a deity of souls and fate, and considers the refinement and perfection of dwarven souls to be his greatest calling. He also has a special interest in runes, though whether these are the Dwarven runic alphabet or the Thessalonian runes of magic is a bit unclear. I tend to believe it is the former, but at least one source calls out the intrinsic power of runes themselves, which might indicate the latter. Someone should really make a video about rune magic to try to clear that up. Anyway, as a deity of the Dwarven pantheon, Magrim is treated with reverence by many dwarves of the Inner Sea region, though the dwarves of Garund either worship differently than their Avistani cousins, or have lost their connection to his faith entirely. Outside of his dedicated clergy, the Taskmaster is generally worshipped by mortuary workers, craftsmen, and those seeking a clear path for their life. Magrim is, much like his brother Torag, almost universally depicted as a dwarf. His skin is deep black, the color of cast iron. His eyes glow with an internal fire reminiscent of a forge. Though he is bald, he maintains a long white beard woven into complex braids and decorated with large stones marked with dwarven runes. He is dressed in workman's clothing, with heavy gloves and a blacksmith's apron, both made from stone. In his hands, he wields a hammer intended for forging, which might also be the war hammer he takes into battle, though that is unclear. Magrim is one of the very few deities in the Great Beyond who maintains not one, but two homes in the multiverse. His first home is the Cloister, in heaven. This realm is a subterranean cavern beneath the roots of Heaven's mountain, which is adjacent to the realm of Torag. This is the realm intended for Magrim's dwarven petitioners, who are intended to serve him in heaven. By contrast, his other home is the Rune Barrow. This realm is a tomb in the boneyard, to which only Magrim and his chosen servants have access. An immense rune of Magrim's design, called the Grathark, ensures that the Rune Barrow remains protected against all invaders. Devout followers of Magrim, called Magrimites, generally serve their communities in more than just priestly roles. They typically have conventional jobs and trades in their communities, often as craftsmen, but also as political advisors, miners and lumberjacks, or even cooks. They rarely take up positions of leadership, seeing themselves not as authority figures, but as guides along the path of life. They take on the role of community advisors, listening to the problems of others, then offering advice after a period of reflection and prayer. Magrim's doctrine is spelled out in a pair of holy texts, the Journey of the Last Breath and Magrim's Measure. The Journey of the Last Breath is a straightforward and informative text on the nature of final judgment and the afterlife. The text clearly explains the various afterlives available to mortal souls, and what kind of life decisions can lead to each eternal destination. Notably, the text does not qualitatively weigh the various afterlives against one another, or recommend that followers pursue one path over another. It simply explains what decisions a mortal soul might make to result in each afterlife upon Pharasma's judgment. The second text, Magrim's Measure, requires a bit more explanation. Magrim teaches that earnest hard work is the best path toward a fulfilling life. This is most effective when that work is put toward a concrete long-term goal. The intention with this approach to life is to allow followers to identify a clear path for their lives, then provide them with measurable signs of progress along that path, so that when they die, they feel accomplished and have no unfinished business preventing them from moving on. Magrim's Measure, then, is a tool which followers might employ in their search for a long-term goal. The text describes the typical careers available in conventional dwarven communities, from bakers to builders to healers, and the various measurable goals which followers might set for themselves in these professions. The text also describes which members of the dwarven pantheon have dominion over this path, and who might guide the follower in question on their journey. While Magrim's doctrine preaches the importance of tradition, and especially dwarven tradition, he is careful to emphasize that rigid adherence to tradition is not strictly necessary to achieving one's ideal afterlife. Magrim sees life as a path, and traditions represent a well-traveled road with clearly defined mile markers and signposts. These paths have been explored and documented by the dwarven people for centuries, and the wisdom of one's ancestors can be an excellent companion on the journey of life. Non-traditional lifestyles, by contrast, represent paths less traveled, which present greater risks of becoming lost before reaching one's destination. That said, for some travelers, backroads and game trails are the preferred route, and some people even need to blaze an entirely new trail. For these individuals, Magrim requires his followers to provide the same support they would more traditionally minded people. Tradition, in Magrim's view, is a useful tool, but should never get in the way of a fulfilling life. At the same time, non-traditional lives are seen as just as valid, but are considered fraught, and should be approached with care and adequate forethought and preparation. In addition to their other duties, Magrimites are charged with the protection of the dead. They devote themselves to the preparation of bodies for burial and the proper performance of funeral and burial rites. Magrim teaches that the desecration of the dead can pull a soul from its proper path to the afterlife, and thus instructs his followers to defend tombs and graveyards against plunderers or other outside disturbances. Magrimites take a harsh view of grave robbers. They also deal harshly with the undead, seeing the destruction of such creatures as a sacred duty. They are careful to avoid damaging the soul of an undead being, however, as their goal is always the return of such creatures to their natural place in the River of Souls, so they might eventually be judged. One temple to Magrim is present in every dwarven community, though it is not always a prominent building. This signifies the important but subdued role which Magrim fills in dwarven society. These temples are always locations intended for practical work, ranging from forges to sawmills. These places of business were often founded by devout Magrimites in years past, and function as entirely normal businesses during working hours. The priests of Magrim's church often work in these establishments, then open them up for worship after the business has closed for the day. These facilities are typically decorated with runes, which outline Magrim's philosophy. Services for the dead are common in these facilities, as are lessons on dwarven history or the meanings behind runes of power. The faith of Magrim is practiced in effectively all dwarven communities in Avestan. Most prominent among them are the dwarven cities Highhelm and Yanderhof. Other dwarven cities and settlements, including Larad, Rolgrimdur, and Tar Kazmuch, all hold the dwarven pantheon in high regard, including Magrim. Outside of specifically dwarven towns, the Undercroft district beneath the capital city of Karlsgard, in the land of the Lenorm kings, houses many dwarves who hold the faith of Magrim close to their hearts. The taskmaster generally keeps to himself, and rarely involves himself in the affairs of the world, and so legends about his great deeds are rare. Magrim, being the elder brother of Torag, is the eldest member of the dwarven pantheon. His origins are unclear, since nothing is known about his parents. It is even unclear if he truly manifested as a deity before Torag and Angrad, or if the three brothers manifested together, and their ages are simply a reflection of their personalities and how they relate to one another. What is clear is that after Torag forged the dwarves from stone and iron, and poured fire into their bellies to give them life, it was Magrim who taught the dwarven race how to pray and commune with their gods. For this reason, all dwarves pay special honor to Magrim with their prayers, even those who, rightfully, see Torag as their patriarch. While Torag sees himself as the outfitter of heaven's armies against the fiendish forces of the universe, and Angrad sees himself as a general or war leader, Magrim takes on a more subdued duty. Upon establishing himself in heaven and in the boneyard, he took up the task of reforging those souls who were broken. While Torag's forge is generally seen as a place of new creation, Magrim's is seen as a place of repair. He sends out his servants to collect damaged or broken souls, then brings them to his workshop, where he uses the heat of his forge and the might of his arm to hammer out their impurities and weld any cracks or fractures back together. On rare occasions, some souls might even need to be melted down and recycled, which I interpret to mean sent back and reincarnated so they might find their life's path anew. As the eldest of the dwarven gods, Magrim generally gets along well with his fellow members of the dwarven pantheon. While none of the other deities would ever refer to him as friendly or welcoming, Magrim respects their areas of concern and the paths they can guide followers upon. Magrim generally sees Torag and Angrad as being too strongly devoted to the tenets of good for his taste, as he believes strict moral neutrality is the proper approach to life as a deity. Of all the members of the dwarven pantheon, Magrim is the one who gets along best with his half-sister Drangvit, the dwarven goddess of debt and vengeance. Often ignored or disliked by the rest of her family, Drangvit works closely with Magrim to ensure that vengeance is carried out before those who were wronged pass on, so they might find rest in the afterlife. Magrim's most notable relationship is that which he maintains with Pharasma. Dwarven legends claim that even when Magrim was still young, Pharasma sat on her throne and judged the souls of the dead. Magrim has never seen her with anything less than deference and respect, and sees his task not as the judgment of the dead, but the preparation of their souls for judgment by her hand. Pharasma, for her part, sees Magrim as a trusted ally, and one with a useful and powerful skill set. When she comes across souls too damaged for her to judge fairly, she sends them to Magrim for repair, trusting his skill and knowledge without question. Servitors of Pharasma are often granted access to the rune barrow. Magrim also has a good relationship with other deities who study runes or fate, such as Magd. The Taskmaster and the Three Pools often discuss the nature of fate and the origin of runes. While they often disagree, their debates are always friendly, and they count one another as confidants and allies. Similarly, Magrim has a good working relationship with both Irori and Nethys, and has acted on multiple occasions as a conduit or diplomat between the two. Irori respects Magrim's teachings regarding living a life which leaves no business unfinished, while Nethys respects his knowledge of runes, history, and the nature of fate. Magrim's generally aloof attitude has earned him few enemies over his lifetime, but there are a few notable exceptions to this rule. Droskar, dwarven god of toil and exploitation, resents Magrim's title as the Taskmaster, and schemes to find ways to oust the elder dwarf god from his position. In return, Magrim pays little heed to Droskar's rage, seeing him as little more than a wayward child. Magrim also, unsurprisingly, sees deities of undeath as his enemies, especially those who revel in the spreading of undeath, like Urgathoa or the various undead demon lords. This enmity probably doesn't extend to Erasni, though that's pure speculation. Not to speculate too much more, but it seems entirely reasonable to assume that Magrim has a positive relationship with deities who watch over non-traditional lifestyles. A good representation of this type of deity might be Arshay, who teaches their followers to explore gender roles and sexualities so they might find their truest selves. These lifestyles are seen as non-traditional in most societies, though notably not among all corners of dwarven society, and thus are not actively encouraged by Magrim's faith. Magrim likely sees Arshay as serving an important role for those seeking these lifestyles, and probably works with them so these individual followers might still lead fulfilling lives and find peace upon their deaths. For players who might be interested in playing characters who follow Magrim, here are a few useful details. For those using the alignment rules, Magrim is a lawful neutral deity, and will accept clerics of that alignment, plus lawful good and true neutral alignments. His edicts are to perfect a craft or trade, to carve runes, to destroy undead, and to aid others to complete unfinished tasks. Conversely, to treat graves irreverently, to mistreat your tools, to create undead, or to damage a soul are all anathema to Magrim. The Taskmaster's holy symbol is an archway carved with runes, which is oddly evocative of an Ayudara, though the two concepts are unconnected. His domains are death, duty, fate, and glyph. He also has the alternate domains of creation and soul. Magrim's sacred colors are black and white, and members of his priesthood prominently incorporate these colors into their dress. Priests will typically favor one color over the other, depending on which duties they are performing at a given time. For instance, during the preparation or performance of funeral services, or during hard labor, they will generally favor black. On the other hand, while teaching, providing guidance, or leading worship services, they will instead incorporate more white into their garb. In situations where prominently displaying these colors is impractical, devout Magrimites will instead tie a band of cloth around their arm, which is black on one side and white on the other. This is more easily disguised, or hidden under a sleeve if necessary. Magrim's favored weapon is the warhammer, something he shares with his younger brother Torag. Magrim is a proponent of tradition, after all, and it doesn't get much more traditional than a dwarf and his warhammer. Other dwarven weapons, especially weapons from the hammer or axe weapon groups, will be common among his faithful, as will the clan dagger for obvious reasons. Dwarven tradition often incorporates the use of heavy armor and shields, and these might be found among Magrim's faithful as well. Magrim's favored animal is the mole, which is actually the favored animal of Nivi from the last video, funnily enough. The mole is favored for its subterranean nature. Magrimites with familiars or animal companions might choose other animals with burrow speeds for the same reason. Creatures which dwell in caves or in the Darklands would also be a good choice, though it's worth remembering that most dwarves see bats as abominations, since they are flying creatures which make their homes underground. Little information has been provided on the mechanical makeup of Magrim's church, but his teachings probably appeal to an equal mix of cloistered and war priest doctrine clerics. The aspects of rune scholarship and funeral rites likely appeal to cloistered clerics, while the protection of graves and the emphasis on physical labor likely appeal to war priests. Classes or builds which emphasize the wisdom stat, such as the ranger, will likely adapt well to the usual Magrimite role as an advisor to those around them, and as a guide along the path of life. The edicts to destroy the undead might encourage Magrimites to take feats from the Undead Slayer or Hallowed Necromancer archetypes. Similarly, the Bones Mystery Oracle or the Psychopomp Bloodline Sorcerer might feel some appeal to Magrim's faith, though it's important to remember that the creation of undead is specifically anathema to the Taskmaster's teachings. From a narrative standpoint, a summoner whose eidolon is a manifestation of a spirit or undead being who has unfinished business would be a fantastically flavorful character option. Dwarves are, of course, far and away the most common followers of Magrim. His quiet and reserved nature among the gods limits the likelihood of his priests to evangelize to members of other ancestries, and his encouragement of traditional lifestyles means that devout Magrimites most often settle down in dwarven communities, which have historically been somewhat insular. This is changing in the Age of Lost Omens, however, and the High Helm book has detailed how the Five Kings Mountains region is, in many ways, opening up to the rest of the world. Humans of Ulfin descent, in the lands of the Lenorm kings, might have some exposure to Magrim's faith, and their cultural affiliation with Torag might cause them to take interest in the tales of his elder brother. The elemental connections of the Oreads, Nari, or Talos are relatively common among dwarves due to their connections to stonemasonry and smithing, and these characters would be very familiar with Magrim's faith. Finally, the Duskwalkers have an innate connection to the Boneyard, as they are born from reincarnated souls. Such a character might interpret their reincarnation as a sign from the Taskmaster that their soul must travel the road of life again because they were damaged beyond repair during a previous life. Magrimites' focus on community and the guidance of others sometimes limits them to non-adventuring lifestyles, but exceptions certainly exist. Some followers of the Taskmaster might be called to adventure so they might lay to rest a disturbed soul, or finish the business of some unquiet spirit. Others might be drawn into a life of adventure to help guide the members of their party and ensure they succeed on their chosen quests with no tasks left unfinished. For GMs looking to integrate Magrim and his followers into a campaign, here are some ideas. Magrim's herald is Hruet, a half-celestial Bugain which he adopted as an infant. The Taskmaster sometimes shows his favor by imbuing mundane tools with magical power when they are first crafted. Additionally, stonemasons who earn his favor find that stone splits evenly and easily beneath their chisels. Conversely, tools shattering suddenly or magical runes backfiring against their caster are all signs of his disfavor. Additionally, tools or weapons might flash with a burst of heat for an instant and burn the hand of the wielder. The first idea that pops into my head surrounding the faith of Magrim would involve Dongon Hold. This dwarven sky citadel is located in Garund, between the warring magical superpowers of Nex and Geb. The dwarves of Dongon Hold protected themselves from the archwizards of these nations by hiding for centuries in a magic-dead underground vault in the Darklands. This had the consequence of separating the dwarfs from their gods, as their clerics could no longer cast spells. With their reemergence into the surface world in recent years, these dwarves are in an interesting place theologically. The faiths of Torag and Angrad, gods of defense and war, have taken root once again, but Magrim's faith hasn't really made substantial headway. A compelling adventure could center around a group of Magrimites, or followers of multiple deities from the Dwarven pantheon, venturing from Avestan to Dongon Hold to reconnect the Dongon dwarves to their forgotten gods. Magrim is especially well suited to such a campaign, since his edicts to destroy undead would make his clerics well suited to facing the necromantic threats of neighboring Geb. Another sky citadel, or at least former sky citadel, which might benefit from the presence of a helpful Magrimite is Urgir. Located in the hold of Belkzen, Urgir was once called Kol Dukar, but was renamed when it was taken by the orcs of Belkzen. Now under the control of Ardak's Whitehair, this city now serves as the capital of the region. Ardax has been attempting to formalize relations with his neighbors in recent years, and is working toward lasting alliances against the Whispering Tyrant. As a former dwarven sky citadel, it seems reasonable that Urgir might be haunted by the spirits of fallen dwarves and filled with lost dwarven relics. This could present an opportunity for Ardax to make some headway with the dwarves of Galarian. He might extend a formal invitation to the Magrimite Church to return to Urgir and lay to rest the unquiet dwarven dead, and restore sanctity to the dwarven tombs within the city. This campaign would allow for some excellent social tension between dwarf and orc players and NPCs, and would allow a GM to add some much-needed nuance to the orcs of Belkzen. Finally, an interesting idea for an adventure might be to place Magrimites alongside other characters who have a thematic connection to death. One way to accomplish this might be to create an adventure connecting the dwarves of Yanderhof to the Shoanti of the Storval Plateau. The Skoan-Kawa are a Shoanti clan dedicated to the protection of the dead and the performance of funerary rites for their people. This places them in a similar place culturally to the Magrimites among the dwarves. If a necromantic cult operating out of Kermaga or Korvosa drew enough attention or expanded its reach to operate in Yanderhof and on the Storval Plateau, the Church of Magrim and the Skoan-Kawa might both take interest and seek to put a stop to the cult's actions. This would put Magrim's war priests and the Skoan-Kawa bone slayers on the same side and allow for cultural exchange between the two groups. So, that's it. That's Magrim, the Taskmaster. Though he holds little cultural influence outside of dwarven communities, the task he fulfills in the Cycle of Souls is incredibly important. His support of other deities and those who follow them puts him in an excellent supporting role, and the same can often be said of his followers. As the oldest of the dwarven deities, Magrim is seen as a wise counselor, and though he maintains a reserved distance from most of his fellow deities, most gods treat him with respect. In the next video, Dwarf Month continues with an exploration of the villain of the dwarven pantheon. Up next is Droskar, god of toil, and the former student of Torag. See you next time.